Hi, boys and girls. Welcome to Storytime with Nonie and Finnegan.
Do you remember last time, Much Afraid, when she started on her journey with sorrow and suffering, she met one of her fearing relatives. Do you remember what his name was? Pride. That's right. Pride is something that makes us think about ourselves more than other people. And today we're going to find out about the opposite of pride. Much Afraid is going to learn about humility. Well, as Much Afraid and sorrow and suffering were walking along the path to the high places, she held their hands very tightly after meeting Pride. She didn't want to end up in trouble again with meeting any of her fearing relatives. And at first, it was such a painful journey. Her feet hurt so badly. But, you know, after a while, she started making a little bit better progress, and things seemed to go a little bit easier. Well, one morning, Much Afraid and sorrow and suffering rounded a bend, and there, much to Much Afraid's surprise, was a desert. Far in a valley below her, this huge desert with these pyramids rising out of them. And the shocking thing was that the path was leading down into that desert. And sorrow and suffering began going down that path, and they motioned for her to follow them. And she stopped right there at the top of that path. And she said, "Oh no, we can't go down there. That is leading away from the high places, and the shepherd told me I'm going to the high places. We can't go down there." But they continued to motion to her. "Come on, Much Afraid." And she just stood right there and arguing with them. And after a little bit, she thought, well, I'm calling the shepherd. And she yelled out, "Shepherd, come help me. Shepherd, I need you."
Immediately the shepherd was right there. And he said, "Much Afraid, what's the problem?" And she said, "Well, shepherd, you told me we're going to the high places, and sorrow and suffering are trying to make me go down that path into the desert. And so, please, shepherd, please make a way to the high places, because I know that's where you want me to go." "Much Afraid, that is the way that I want you to go. That is the path that I need for you to take. That is my plan for you." And Much Afraid fell down at the shepherd's feet. She said, "Oh, please, shepherd, please don't make me go down there." And the shepherd said, "Much Afraid, do you love me enough to trust me? Do you trust that I know the way that you need to go? And will you go wherever I tell you to go?" And Much Afraid said, "Oh, shepherd, please forgive me for crying, but I'm just so disappointed that I have to go down into that desert. But yes, I do love you, and I will trust you, and I will go wherever you tell me to go." Much Afraid got down on the ground, and she realized that she needed to do something. She realized that she needed to build a little altar, because she had all these desires inside of her, and she knew she needed to give those desires up. So she piled up the rocks, and then she said, "Shepherd, here are my desires. Here's the things that I want." And she placed them on that little altar of broken rocks. And from somewhere came a little flame, and it burned up her desires. And when they were all burned up, it looked like there was just a heap of ashes there. The shepherd said, "Much Afraid, I want you to look much more closely at what's left." And so Much Afraid looked through the rock, and she saw a rock. And she pulled it up, and the shepherd said, This is humility, much afraid. Humility is exactly the opposite of pride. Humility says, I care more about what you want than what I want. Humility says, I trust you. And much afraid found another little rock. It says, I trust that you know what's best for me. Just a little more, because she's finding some very good jewels, some lessons here. And this one was obey. Because trusting and obeying is all a part of humility. And the shepherd came over to her and he brought her a little pouch. And he said, much afraid, I want you to put these lesson stones inside of this pouch and carry them with you so that you will remember the lesson of humility. And so the shepherd took her hand, much afraid, put that pouch on her belt, and much to her delight and surprise, the shepherd walked with her all the way down that steep, steep canyon walls that looked like they would be impossible for her to go on her own. She leaned on him the whole way, and they began singing songs from the great book, like, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High, the shadow of the Almighty, will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. And before she knew it, they were down in
And I don't have desert, but you'll have to pretend like these rocks are sand, because that's what the desert is like. It's hot, it's sunny, most of the time it's dry, and there aren't any plants that grow around. Some deserts have some cactus and desert plants, but this desert, there was nothing really growing there. They got down and the shepherd took much afraid to these little huts that were right near the base of the pyramids. At sunset, the shepherd came back for much afraid, and he said, much afraid, come with me, I want to show you something. And much afraid and the shepherd were sitting out there watching the beautiful sunset, when all of a sudden the desert seemed like it was filled full of people. And the shepherd said, much afraid, all of my faithful servants have had to go through
and much
the
afraid
desert.
began recognizing many of these people from the great book, from what she had read in the Bible. She saw Abraham and Sarah. They were people that obeyed God when he told them to leave their home and their family and go to a new place. The shepherd, Jesus, or God, led them into a whole new land, and Abraham became the father of a great nation of people. And then she saw Joseph, whose brothers had sold him as a slave to Egypt. And he had remained faithful to God and obedient to God, and he had become a powerful leader close to the Pharaoh himself, and was able to save the world basically from starvation. And she saw David, who as a young man had killed Goliath, the giant, and he had later become king. And she saw Esther, a little Jewish girl who had grown up to become the Queen of Persia. And as all these people were marching past her, the last one turned and looked at her and held out his hand to her. And she realized that she needed to take her place with all of those others who had been faithful to God. Going through the desert was a part of the shepherd's plan for her. Learning the lessons that he had for her there, that she could learn nowhere else. And so she accepted the hand of that last person in line and joined them in their march through the desert. And by doing that, she was saying, yes, I will follow the shepherd wherever he leads me, even if it's someplace I don't want to go, even if it's a hard lesson to learn. I choose to to be humble. I choose humility, trusting and obeying. Well, the shepherd took her back to the little hut where she spent the night. And in the morning, he came and he got her. And he said, much afraid, we're going to go into one of the pyramids. I have some things I want to show you. And he took her in this big room. There was a spiral staircase going up, 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 high up into the top of the pyramid. But they walked past that. He opened a door and they went in. And here was a threshing floor. It was a place where people had brought all this grain, wheat, and they were separating the pieces, the little grains of wheat that look about the size of rice, and they were taking those and they were crushing them with rocks and grinding them up and making flour, which is what you make bread from. Did you know that's where flour and bread come from? It's from this plant like this. And the shepherd said, much afraid, sometimes the things that I want you to go through are going to feel very painful process, but I want you to become like flour that I can use to make bread to feed my people. And then he took her out of that room and they started going up the spiral staircase and they got to the first floor. And inside that room was a potter who had this big lump of clay, and as they watched, he began molding this clay. Have you ever worked with clay? And you can make it into different shapes. Well, that's what this potter was doing. He was taking this lump of clay and turning it into a beautiful vase. And the shepherd said, much afraid, I want you to be soft and allow me to work with you like this man is working with clay. I want to be able to mold you and shape you into someone beautiful that I can use in my kingdom of love, like a beautiful vase. And then he took her out of that room and they climbed higher up the stairway to another room. And inside this room was a very hot furnace. And inside of this furnace was all of this gold. And in the gold, it was being heated up. It was like liquid because it was so hot. It had gotten all melted down. And the shepherd said, the reason they are doing this, much afraid, is if you look closely, you will see how little pieces of dirt, things that don't belong in the gold, are floating to the top. And sure enough, along came the worker and scooped up some stuff off the top of that gold that didn't belong there. And the shepherd said, much afraid, all of my precious jewels, all of the beautiful gold in my kingdom has had to go through the fire. And he said, so don't be surprised. When you go through fiery trials, rejoice and be happy. And much afraid thought, that sounds funny. Rejoice and be happy when I'm going through the fire? But she began to realize that what the shepherd was telling her was that she needed to be ready to go through hard times, if that's what the shepherd was going to use to refine her. And she remembered some other words that she had read in the great book. And it said, he knows the way that I take. When he has tried me, I will come forth as pure gold. Much afraid said, I want to be as pure gold. I want to be able to be a precious jewel for my shepherd. They stayed in the desert for several other days. They were getting their food ready for the journey and their water that they were going to need, and resting, getting ready for the next part of the journey. And one morning, much afraid, went out behind one of the huts, and she saw the first little growing thing that she had seen in the desert the whole time she had been there. It was a little tiny golden flower. And there was this little drain pipe where water was dripping out. And just a drip, drip, drip on that little flower was what was helping it to grow.
And she went up to that little flower and she said, "Oh, little beautiful flower, what's your name?" And the little flower seemed to say, "My name is Acceptance with Joy." Acceptance with joy. Much Afraid realized that she wanted to be able to accept with joy every part of her journey that the shepherd wanted her to go on, even if it was places that she didn't want to go or things she didn't want to do. She wanted to do what the shepherd wanted her to do, accepting it with joy. And she noticed right there at the bottom of that flower was a little rock, and she picked it up to put it in the bag along with her other stones because she wanted to remember acceptance with joy is another part of humility, another part of her becoming that person that the shepherd wanted her to be.
So boys and girls, I hope and pray that you can say to the shepherd, Jesus, come help me when you need him. And also that you will say, Jesus, I give you my desires because I want to follow you more than I want to do what I want. I want to do what you want me to do, shepherd, and I choose to trust and obey you, and I choose to accept with joy whatever you have for me to go through. And I love you, boys and girls, and the shepherd loves you very much. Finnegan is very glad to be with us again today. All right, I'll see you later next time on Storytime with Nonie. Bye-bye.